Today we host someone very special. I'm excited to have my wife, Amy, on the show for the very first time. Amy is a licensed professional counselor who owns a private practice and specializes in helping people navigate anxiety and depression. And honestly, this conversation could not be more appropriate right now. According to the CDC, nearly 40% of high school students report persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness. And almost 1 in 5 adolescents have experienced a major depressive episode. Anxiety and depression among children and teenagers have risen dramatically over the past several years, becoming one of the defining challenges that face families today. But this conversation isn't just about kids. A lot of dads are struggling too, and Amy talks with a lot of them, a lot of parents. And even if fathers don't say it out loud, men often carry anxiety, stress, emotional exhaustion, and even depression, and often they carry it silently. Many fathers feel pressure to provide, lead, protect, kind of hold everything together while at the same time feeling isolated and overwhelmed, and sometimes even emotionally disconnected. So today we're going to talk about both sides of the issue, what dads need to know about anxiety and depression in their children, and what dads need to recognize in themselves. I really think this is going to be a helpful conversation. I'm grateful to have Amy here to share her professional insights and her heart for families. So, hi, honey, welcome.
Hey,
She's right.
thanks
She's
for
right
having
down.
me.
Yeah, she's right downstairs. But we're recording all this, so we needed to do the
Yeah.
video here. So let's start off with the big question. A lot of dads grew up believing emotions were something to push through or ignore. Seems to be something that was handed down generationally. So, how does a father's own emotional health affect the emotional health of his children?
Yeah, well, gosh, it impacts it immensely. One of the biggest misconceptions that a lot of dads have in, gosh, all generations that it seems, um, emotions are to be suppressed. Strength is when you are not emotional.
Yeah.
The only problem is emotions, when they happen, they don't disappear. They sometimes come out sideways. One way or another, they're gonna eke out. It could be, emotional numbness. It can be a need to control. It can be workaholism. It could be irritability.
Mhm.
Just all those things kind of come up. And if a father isn't managing his own emotions, it has a direct impact on the child.
Yeah. So, we talk about emotional memory, a
Mhm.
lot on the podcast, and kids don't remember all the things we taught them or said to them, but they remember how we made them feel. So, the emotional climate of the home is one of those things that kids take with them. And so, it's really important to understand that, yes, who you are spills over into what your kids believe and who they eventually become. But, all these things are kind of on a spectrum, right? Because there are challenges that we all go through,
Mhm.
issues, times of difficulty that can create some measure of anxiety, maybe even sadness. But then there's the other extreme where it truly is acute. So, what's the difference between normal stress and sadness or something more serious that may require counseling or professional support?
Yeah, the big thing is stress and sadness. They're just normal parts of life. It's just what it means to be human. We have good emotions, we have bad emotions. The hard ones are the ones generally when we look at it. Those are the ones that people have a hard time dealing with, and those are the ones generally that people suppress. That deal is, and I think kind of what I see in my practice is this tendency to um, kind of make every situation, every stress, every something, this big crisis.
Hmm.
And it becomes overwhelming for the kid. And if the dad isn't regulating his own emotions, it naturally causes the child to put on some stress. Because whatever's not being managed in the home by the parents, it falls, someone has to catch it. It's
Hmm.
kind of what I always, it's kind of like this hot potato of stress,
Hmm.
and if parents aren't regulating, well, then the kid does. And when it kind of gets to that point, um, you know, gosh, kids start maybe not sleeping well. They
Mm,
start losing interest in maybe things that used to bring them joy. Gosh, they start withdrawing socially. They stop, communicating. They tend to withdraw. There's major mood swings that can happen. A lot of kids, if it's prolonged, they're going to start having some physical ailments, stomach
mm,
aches,
mm,
headaches, stuff like that. When it kind of gets to that point, even before, you got to intervene. It's something that people do not need to ignore.
mm,
Um, Getting help, and I think this is paramount, getting help is not an evidence of weakness. Okay. It
mhm,
just means that we are human dealing with very human things. And help does not mean weakness. It means, you're courageous, you're strong. Healthy people seek solutions. And
mhm,
so it's a real big misnomer that, gosh, we don't talk about emotions, that's weakness. Well, no, it's the exact opposite.
mm,
Healthy people seek solutions.
mm,
So whenever you start seeing, the kids, you know, having problems, their life kind of starts, gosh, kind of losing the joy, the funness, the curiosity, that all the things, that's when you intervene.
mhm,
One other thing I also like to tell parents is, for medical problems, um, it's easy. People are like, "Oh, you got a broken bone. Let's go to the doctor to fix the bone. Okay, let's put it in the sling. Let's put it in, the crutches, cast, whatever." Whereas the emotional side, which is a very powerful part of what it means to be human, there's this illusion that, ooh, that we don't talk about that. There's shame associated with it.
mm.
Um, the healthiest dads are the ones that openly talk about it, openly pursue their kids, and really tune into that. So that's kind of a key thing to remember.
Yeah, I don't know what it is within men in particular,
Mm,
but we really have a hard time
mm,
being in
yep.
touch with how we're feeling and connecting those dots, and then being able to share them. And of course, kids, sadly, are the innocent bystanders. They kind of just get the spillover, and it impacts them. And so, when you see symptoms like this in your child, I think it's important to maybe look within first. It's not always just the child's issue, what they're going through. Maybe there's something there. I'm sure that you encounter that many times. Parents thinking, well, my child has an issue. Well, it may be something that's stemming from one or both of the parents or the climate in the home. You know,
Mhm.
this brokenness that we're talking about, and I tend to use the word brokenness. Maybe that's not a clinical term. It's probably not all that positive, but millions of men are coming into adulthood and into marriage and into parenthood with brokenness
Mhm.
from upbringing. And there's all kinds of things that have um, affected them in that way. But one
Mhm.
of those that we're really seeing, and the research bears this out, is this digital age that we're living in and how that is infecting not only our kids, but also adults. So let's talk about that for a second. How much does technology, social media contribute to anxiety in kids today? And what should dads understand about the emotional world their children are facing?
Yeah, a big thing, gosh, we can go on forever about this
Yeah.
one. Emotionally, it changes us. Neurologically, it changes us. As far as our brain waves, our patterns, our neural pathways. I mean, we're constantly shifting and shaping and comparing and nonstop stimulation. Excuse me. This constant. It's zero emotional quietness.
Mhm.
It's constant, 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 and
Mm.
I truly believe, our brains aren't wired with the capacity to take it all in all the time.
Mhm.
Another thing that I always share with families is, God being God, he took 6 days to create everything, and even he took a whole day to rest.
He sure did.
And yeah, and so, and he was God. He doesn't need all that,
That's right.
but I think with digital and stuff like that, gosh, social media, all of it, it is 24/7. And again, like I said, we can spend so much time on this, but I think within the structure of the day, there
Mhm.
needs to be rest.
Mhm.
There needs to be a time off of social media. There needs to be, all screens turned off.
Mhm.
Um, a child needs to know every single day that they are seen
Mhm.
eye to eye, that
Y
they're heard,
Mhm.
okay, that they are known and they are loved.
Mhm.
And if you have a screen somewhere in the dynamic of a family, no one's looking at the kid. Nobody's hearing. Okay, that child isn't known and they could really feel unloved, especially if they're on highlight reels and social media.
Mhm.
Okay, comparing their, mediocre life to all of these fabulous trips and clothings and all this
Mhm.
stuff, it it shapes a child.
Mhm.
For an adult knows, well, that's not real. Those are highlight reels. That's, I mean, I'm not going to show all my bloopers, on the world, stage. Well, to a child, they don't have their rational brain formed yet. It's all
Mhm.
emotion.
Mhm.
And so they are feeding on this and it's really shaping who they believe they are.
Mhm.
Um, so again, it doesn't mean technology is evil. It
Right.
does mean that fathers need to lead very intentionally as far as creating boundaries, creating, you know, parameters, having face to face conversations with their child, plugging into them to where the kid is seen, they feel heard,
Mhm.
okay, they feel known, and ultimately feel loved. And that has to be a paramount thing in the home.
Yeah, sure. So, I know you talk to parents about not just these facts, and you move more towards strategies.
Mhm.
And so, I wonder what would be some practical everyday habits or rhythms that
Mhm.
families can build to help strengthen, their emotional resilience.
Mhm.
What are those practical things that you would say, "Hey, I want you to do this, this, and this
Mhm.
week." What
Right.
would you suggest?
Yeah. Well, the simple rhythms of the family, they
Mhm.
matter. Okay, because a child, if you look at tiny, tiny, tiny kids, right, whenever they're starting to read, even before preschool, okay, a child wants to read the same book over and over. They want to
That's
watch the
true.
same video over and over. I can verbatim quote Goodnight Moon to anybody because I've read it so many times. Well, to an adult, it's like, oh my gosh, I cannot read this again. To a child, though, it provides security.
Mhm.
Okay. Consistency, excuse me, the predictability, okay, the structure that a father can provide,
Mhm.
though it seems mundane and oh my God, we're doing this again. Well, that provides safety, security, okay, emotional, just security in the sense that they can predict their world. Okay. For,
Mhm.
for a child who is all emotional, they need someone protecting their environment.
Mhm.
And children are dependent on parents to do that, primarily the dad as head as the home. So
Mhm.
you've got, shared meals. It can be consistent bedtime routines. It could be conversations that you have with your child that are not hurried. Okay, again,
Right.
remembering my child needs to be seen. They need to feel, again, the key word is feel,
Mm.
heard, feel known, feel loved. Okay, unhurried conversations, time outside, throwing the ball, riding the bikes, taking, vacations, camping, whatever, family traditions, rituals, prayer together,
Mhm. Mhm.
at dinners, at bedtime. Again, referencing what we just talked about, technology free connection. Again, if you can do more kind of face to face, even if it's shoulder to shoulder connection with your kid,
Mhm.
they're going to feel seen,
Mhm.
they're going to feel heard, they're going to feel known, and they're going to feel loved. And at the end
Mhm.
of the day, if the world is falling apart and your child knows that, they're secure, they're
Yeah.
safe,
Yeah.
which is
Boy,
powerful.
it's powerful. It's an amazing gift that really shapes
Mhm.
them for their whole lives. So we've got dads obviously listening, watching. From your experience as a counselor, what are some of the signs that a father should be looking for in their child
Mhm.
um, to recognize whether that child is struggling with anxiety or depression? And, those could be signs that sometimes dad miss or misunderstand. But what are those red flags that you would say, hey, be watching for this in your children?
Sure. Yeah. So it could be, as early as kind of preschool, all the way through high school.
Mhm.
It's before your child really starts interacting with others. The first 4 years or so before preschool, or right kind of towards the beginning of preschool and school age, kids, you know your kid. You know how they are, their temperament, so much about them. And
Mhm.
so when they start interacting with others, a child learns, to kind of transition from I'm safe, I'm secure, this is my identity into, okay, how do I now fit it into the world?
Mhm.
And it's usually when they start getting outside of the home, kind of with other kids. If there are some struggles going on, you're going to see problems in child to child relationships.
Okay.
And I find in the younger kids a lot of just behavioral problems,
Mhm.
distractions. Again, like I mentioned before, kind of a loss in interest and kind of zest, curiosity. If the child is safe and secure, they have just the emotional freedom to explore, be curious, be creative, do those things. If your child starts kind of closing up,
Mhm.
um, that's kind of a big flag. It may
Mhm.
not be a red flag, but it's kind of a yellow flag,
Mhm.
and start kind of seeing some of those things early. And again, if they start having conflicts with, of course, family at home, which a lot of that is normal. And in an emotionally regulated household where there's open communication, face to face, spending time together, you're
Mhm.
going to create a culture to where we can talk about those things, and it's safe to do so. But if it goes beyond that point to where grades start slipping, maybe they start having you start receiving phone calls from the school, or the preschool saying, Jimmy's crying all the time or
Mhm.
is inconsolable, or, that could suggest some emotional distress
Mhm.
to turn into.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah. So you mentioned, looking for and approaching children, and I'm wondering if there's a question or two that dads could use to probe, to ask,
Mhm.
to just, regularly, habitually,
Mhm.
whether it's every night or not, I don't know, but just to check in with their kids
Yeah.
to ask questions,
Mhm.
and what would those questions be, or what would be some of the regular things that you would maybe say to your child that could help them with this emotional dimension of their life.
Yeah, a big thing that we did was, asking our kids what's your high, what's your low.
Hmm.
And it kind of got commonplace and stuff like that. And we started getting kind of boring answers.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, for the dad to really dig in and say, you say this, but how are you really doing?
Right.
You talk about maybe this situation at school, you say it was really upsetting, or it was really embarrassing. Where did you feel that
Mm,
kind of in your body?
mm,
Okay.
mhm,
And kind of getting your child, it's more experiential in a sense, but it kind of gets your child kind of in touch with where emotions reside in the body.
mhm,
God gives us emotions as signals, okay, when things are important, and again, kind of getting back to what we talked about, they're not to be suppressed. Okay. It's kind of like a outdoor water hose. Okay, so you've got this hose up to your faucet. Okay, you turn your water on. Okay, the water kind of flows out. Okay, and those are our emotions. Okay, and that's how God kind of designed our nervous system and our bodies to function. We're supposed to have these emotions. It's what makes us human,
Hmm.
all the things. Well, when we start having stress, or maybe we don't have an emotionally available or safe home, it's almost as if we take that water hose and we kink it.
Hmm.
Okay. So the water's still going. Okay. But between the faucet and the kink, there's just this buildup of pressure.
Hmm.
Okay. That's emotion that's happening in really all of us.
Hmm.
And so, the challenge here is you want to really have your child, one, model it, but have your child keep their hose unkinked.
Yeah,
and,
right.
and digging in. Well, how do you really feel? Hey, you talk about this, but gosh, I remember when that happened to me once at your age or whatever,
Hmm.
and so again, you're kind of coming down to their level and creating a safe space. This is how it felt for me. Have you ever felt that way? And again, keeping kind of that hose unkinked, is really, really helpful. One, to model, but also to allow your kids to say, "Hey, this is okay. It's just part of being human."
Yeah, exactly. I think many
Yeah.
dads are about, they think their job is about controlling behavior, and sometimes it's controlling emotions,
Mhm,
and that tends to be the focus. But allowing a child to have an emotion that they're having,
mhm.
and then teaching them, as you said, modeling for them the proper way to express that emotion, that there's a channel, that there's an outlet, that you unkink that hose
Right.
and let them experience the emotion. Most of those things are valid human emotions. And so
Sure.
we've got to allow them to express that. And then they grow up having some kind of ability to connect what they're feeling with what they do and then regulate themselves.
Right.
Which leads to the next question, because you're counseling, mostly adults,
Mhm,
and you see them, and you say that a lot of your clients, most of them are dealing with issues of anxiety and depression. That's kind of your specialization.
mhm.
Um, so as you see adults in where they are now, what would you say is the biggest, if you could label one, maybe it's not one thing. What would
Mhm.
you say though is the biggest or one of the biggest early childhood um, traits that you saw with people who are now adults dealing with issues of anxiety and depression? What was true about their childhood, kind of across the board? And I know generalizations are not always the best thing to do, but you see patterns, obviously. What kind of patterns do you see in these adults who are now suffering from anxiety and depression? What was true about their childhood?
It's a big question.
Yeah,
And it's hard to paint a huge, big, wide brush over
sure.
that.
Hmm.
But I kind of like, eh, kind of talking about anxiety specifically. Um, Anxiety overall, is abandonment of self.
Hmm. Okay.
As a child, okay, that's why children are dependent upon their parents, okay, primarily their father. By even when their emotions, because kids, they're not rational beings yet. They don't get this prefrontal cortex thinking brain until their mid-20s. Okay, so up until that point, everything's emotion.
Hmm.
Okay. And it's kind of like you have this vessel, which is the child's body. Okay. And emotions are just ping-ponging like wildfire. Okay. Kind of in their nervous system, and they're experiencing everything, and they don't have a rational capacity to make sense of it.
Hmm.
Okay. What anxiety tends to be is in its primitive form is when we abandon ourselves.
Hmm.
As a child, we depend on our parents to help regulate all this noise. Okay.
Hmm.
And if a parent can't regulate themselves, they
Hmm.
can't regulate a child.
Hmm.
So first and foremost, the parents need to know self-regulation, okay, to be resilient under stress, okay, to be able to be measured when things are stressful, okay. When a parent isn't capable okay, of managing themselves, it immediately affects the child because a child by design, I think it's God's design, is dependent upon the caregiver to help regulate. It's this whole concept of neuroception. It's the nervous system's ability to self-regulate. Okay. And a child or in a person who develops anxiety is this kind of noise, emotional noise, was never validated,
Mhm.
was never talked about, was never mirrored, was never able to be witnessed, seen, heard, known, and loved. Okay, so what a child intrinsically does, they don't have this thinking brain yet, but what a child does is their narrative isn't, gosh, something's wrong with dad because he's coming in slamming doors and stuff. Children don't think that way. What children internalize is, it's not, my environment is chaotic, okay, and there's something wrong out here. Children internalize, there's something wrong with me.
Yeah, right.
And that's the first point that they start abandoning themselves,
Mhm.
because then they kind of kink the water hose. I'm too much. I'm too emotional. I don't have space to share. And again, it's not rational, but they don't have that part of their brain yet.
Right.
It's how they experience just with the emotional mind of a child.
Mhm.
And so very early on, they emotionally detach from the part of it of what God gave us to make us human.
Mhm.
And so then we start focusing on managing our world outside of us instead of tuning in and listening to these signals, which are our emotions.
Mhm.
And so again, it's not really a broad brushstroke of this is the big thing, but I think systemically, if a child's not able to help, or excuse me, if a parent's not able to help the child make sense of this,
Mhm.
um, a child abandons themselves.
Yeah.
And that's what anxiety is. Anxiety, if you're in it long enough, will turn to depression.
Mhm. Right.
I talk about this kinking of the water hose, this buildup of pressure and emotion. Okay. If you continue to not listen to it and not kind of unkink to let some of that energy flow, over time, your nervous system, kind of where all this emotion is, it'll unplug.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay. Here come the feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, apathy, despair, isolation, all of that.
Mhm.
And so I'd much rather have a child who is anxious than one that's depressed because it takes a lot to get a kid depressed.
Wow. Yeah. Hmm. That's really good. Of course, we could go on and talk forever.
Mhm.
So, just to wind it down, I want to thank you for being here. You're very good at what you do. And I think one of the biggest takeaways
Mhm.
is strong people seek solutions.
Mhm.
And so, dads, if you're there, there's this window of opportunity you have with your kids, right? And so it means taking care of yourself, addressing these things that are going on,
Mhm.
and by doing so, taking care of your children as well. So, Amy, thanks for sharing your insights today. This
Mhm.
conversation matters because these are touching so many homes, right? Including the homes of good dads
Mhm.
who love their families deeply, but may not always know where to start. So, thanks again.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
Yep. Thank you, dads, for joining us today on the Father Friend podcast. Remember, the most important voice your kids will ever hear is yours. So lean in, lead well, and love big.